The sound of a shattering wine glass didn't just break the silence, it severed the career of Manhattan's most arrogant billionaire. One moment, Preston Calloway was laughing, wiping a drop of Chateau Margaux from his bespoke Italian suit and sneering at the trembling waitress. The next, the heavy mahogany doors of the private dining room swung open, and the one man Preston feared more than bankruptcy walked in and bowed to the waitress. In the world of the elite, power is usually loud, but true authority is silent. And the silence that followed would cost Preston everything. The Vermilion Club was not the kind of place where you made a reservation, it was the kind of place where you inherited a membership. Tucked away behind an unmarked black door on East 62nd Street, just steps from Fifth Avenue, it smelled of old money, mahogany, beeswax, and cigars that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. On this particular rainy Tuesday in November, the atmosphere inside was electric, though suppressed, like a tightly coiled spring. The Reason sat at the head of the royal table, a circular booth upholstered in blood-red velvet near the fireplace. Preston Calloway, the CEO of Calloway Voss Industries, leaned back, swirling a glass of amber liquid that had been aged since the Eisenhower administration. At 52, Preston looked like a man who had been carved out of granite and dressed by Savile Row. He was handsome in a predatory way, with silver fox hair and eyes the color of a frozen lake. He was currently in the middle of a hostile takeover of a rival tech firm, a move that would make him the undisputed king of New York's telecommunications sector. "The board is terrified," Preston scoffed, addressing the three men sitting with him. They were his lieutenants, lawyers and fixers who grew rich on his crumbs. "They think they can block the merger with a poison pill strategy. It's adorable, really." "They say the silent shareholder is the problem," said one of the lawyers, a nervous man named Arthur. "Someone owns a 51% controlling stake in the hospitality group we're trying to acquire for the land rights. If this ghost votes no, the deal dies." Preston laughed, a harsh, barking sound that made the nearby tables flinch. "Ghosts don't vote, Arthur. Money votes. And whoever this silent partner is, everyone has a price. I'll buy them out, strip the assets, and turn their little boutique hotel chain into server farms before Christmas." He snapped his fingers. It wasn't a wave. It was a command, a sharp crack that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Girl," he shouted, not bothering to look up. "More wine, and bring the 82 Latour. If you drop this one, I'll have your wages garnered for the next 3 lifetimes." Sarah, a waitress who had been drifting through the room like a shadow, stiffened. She was 34 but looked younger, her face scrubbed free of makeup, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, practical bun. Her uniform was impeccable. Crisp white shirt, black vest, black trousers, but it hung loosely on her frame. She looked tired. Not just sleepy tired, but soul tired. She moved toward the table, her eyes lowered. In the Vermilion Club, the staff were trained to be furniture. They were there to serve, not to exist. "Yes, Mr. Calloway," Sarah said, her voice a soft murmur. She reached for the empty decanter to clear it. "Don't speak," Preston said, finally turning his cold gaze upon her. He looked her up and down with a mixture of boredom and disgust. "Just pour, and try not to shake. You look like you're going through withdrawals." His table erupted in sycophantic laughter. Arthur, the lawyer, chuckled nervously. "She does look a bit fragile, Preston." Sarah didn't flinch. She had worked at the Vermilion for 3 months. She had seen men like Preston Calloway every night. They were all the same, men who mistook their bank account balance for a personality. She took the bottle of Chateau Latour, 1982, a bottle worth roughly $4,500 from the sommelier station. As she approached the table, Preston suddenly shifted his elbow, engaging in an animated gesture to emphasize a point about his yacht. It was a wide, reckless motion. His elbow clipped Sarah's wrist. It wasn't a hard hit, but it was unexpected. The bottle slipped from her grip for a fraction of a second. She caught it, a miracle of reflexes, but a single, heavy drop of red wine escaped the lip of the bottle. Time seemed to slow down. The crimson droplet arched through the air, defying gravity for a heartbeat, before landing squarely on the cuff of Preston Calloway's white Egyptian cotton shirt. The stain bloomed instantly, a stark red star on a field of white. The room didn't go silent yet. That would come later. But the table certainly did. The lawyers froze. The fire crackled in the grate, suddenly deafening. Preston stared at his cuff. He looked at it as if he had been shot. Then, slowly, he raised his eyes to Sarah. "You," he whispered, his voice trembling with a rage that felt disproportionate to the accident. "You stupid, clumsy cow." Sarah recoiled, clutching the bottle to her chest. "Sir, You bumped my arm. I apologize. I'll get some club soda immediately." "I bumped you?" Preston stood up, his chair scraping violently against the parquet floor. He towered over her, utilizing every inch of his height to intimidate. "I am sitting at my table. You are the help. It is your job, your only job, to exist in the space I am not occupying. You failed." He grabbed a linen napkin and dabbed at the stain, smearing it further. He threw the napkin onto the floor. "This shirt cost $800, Preston spat. "That's probably more than you make in a month." "I can pay for the cleaning, sir," Sarah said, her voice steady, though her knuckles were white around the wine bottle. "Cleaning?" Preston laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "You don't clean a stain like this. You burn the shirt, and you certainly don't let the person who ruined it keep their job." He turned to the maître d', a sweating Frenchman named Claude, who had rushed over at the commotion. "Claude," Preston barked, "get this incompetent stray out of my sight, and I want her fired. Now, before she leaves the building. I don't want her serving coffee at a diner in Queens, let alone here." Claude looked torn. He knew Sarah. He knew she was quiet, efficient, and never complained. But Preston Calloway was the club's highest-spending member. He generated 20% of their annual revenue in wine sales alone. "Monsieur Calloway," Claude began, wringing his hands. "It was an accident. Perhaps we can—" "I don't pay $50,000 a year in membership fees for accidents," Preston snarled. He turned back to Sarah, his eyes gleaming with malice. He was enjoying this. It was blood sport to him. "Actually, wait, don't fire her yet." Preston sat back down, a wicked smile curling his lips. He gestured to the empty wine glass in front of him. "Pour the glass," he commanded. Sarah hesitated. "Sir." "You didn't finish your job," Preston said, leaning forward. "Pour the wine. If you can fill this glass to the perfect level, not a drop more, not a drop less, without spilling, maybe I'll let you keep your pathetic little job. I want to see your hands shake." The cruelty was so naked, so unnecessary, that people at nearby tables began to turn. A hush started to spread through the dining room. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The air grew heavy. Sarah looked at the glass. Then she looked at Preston. Her eyes, previously submissive, hardened slightly. There was a flicker of something in them. Not fear, but calculation. "Are you sure you want me to do that, Mr. Calloway?" she asked. Her voice was no longer a murmur. It was clear, carrying across the room. "Do it!" he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Sarah stepped forward. She didn't tremble. She didn't shake. She held the heavy bottle with one hand, her posture correcting itself, her spine straightening. She poured, The dark red liquid flowed smoothly, swirling into the crystal goblet. She stopped exactly at the wide mouth point, the perfect pour. She twisted the bottle with a professional flourish, catching the last drop on the rim, leaving the tablecloth spotless. It was a masterclass in service. She set the bottle down. "Is that all, sir?" Preston narrowed his eyes. He hated that she hadn't cried. He hated that she hadn't begged. It made him feel small, and Preston Calloway did not do small. "No," Preston sneered. "That's not all. You missed a spot." He reached for his glass, the one she had just poured, and with a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed the contents of the glass onto Sarah's uniform. The red wine splashed across her white shirt, soaking into the fabric, dripping down her black vest. The gasp that went through the room was audible. This was a line crossed. This wasn't a reprimand. It was assault. "Now," Preston said, sitting back and crossing his arms, satisfied. "Now you look like you belong in the gutter. Get out of my sight." Sarah stood there, dripping wet. The wine was cold against her skin. She didn't wipe it off. She didn't run. She stood perfectly still, looking down at Preston Calloway. She slowly reached into her apron pocket. Preston expected her to pull out a rag. Instead, she pulled out a phone. "You really shouldn't have done that, Preston," she said. She didn't call him Sir or Mr. Calloway. She used his first name. Preston blinked, confused by the sudden shift in tone. "Excuse me? Put that phone away before I have security drag you out." "I'm texting my husband," Sarah said calmly, tapping a message with her thumb. "He was supposed to meet me here in 10 minutes for a drink, but I think he needs to come in now." "Your husband?" Preston laughed, looking at his lawyers. "What is he, the janitor? Is he going to come mop this up?" "No," Sarah said. She pressed send and slid the phone back into her pocket. She looked up, and for the first time she smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "He's the man you've been trying to call for 3 weeks, the silent partner." Preston froze. The smile dropped from his face. "What?" "The holding company," Sarah said, her voice dropping to an icy calm. "The one blocking your merger? The one that owns 51% of the land you need? It's not a ghost, Preston. It's a family trust. The Miller family trust." She gestured to her wine-stained shirt. "I'm Sarah Miller, and you just threw a vintage Latour on the majority shareholder of the company you're trying to buy." Preston's face went pale. That's impossible. You're a waitress." "I like to know how my businesses are run," Sarah said, picking up a napkin and finally dabbing at her collar. "I like to see how the staff are treated. I like to see what kind of people we allow into our clubs. And usually I like to stay anonymous." She leaned in, placing both hands on the table, looming over him. "But you have a very loud way of demanding attention, Preston." At that exact moment, the heavy double doors at the entrance of the restaurant burst open. The room went silent. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. The air was sucked out of the room. Standing in the doorway was a man who needed no introduction in New York City. He was flanked by 2 large security guards, but they weren't what made people stare. It was the man himself. It was Julian Blackwood. Wait, no Julian. Correction. It was Elias Blackwood. It was Elias Blackwood, the venture capitalist shark known as the Reaper on Wall Street. A man worth $20 billion. A man Preston Calloway had been trying to get a meeting with for 5 years. Elias scanned the room, his eyes scanning the terrified faces of the diners. He looked furious. He looked ready to kill. His eyes landed on the table by the fire. He saw Preston. He saw the spilled wine. And then he saw Sarah, standing there, soaked in red. Elias didn't walk. He stormed across the room. The sound of his dress shoes on the parquet floor was like a drumbeat of war. Preston scrambled to stand up, his face breaking into a sweaty, desperate smile. "Mr. Blackwood! Elias! My God, what a surprise! I didn't know you were a member here. We were just—" Elias walked right past Preston. He didn't even look at him. He acted as if Preston Calloway was a ghost. Elias stopped in front of Sarah. The entire room watched, breathless. The terrifying Reaper of Wall Street, the man who dissolved companies for sport, took a handkerchief from his pocket. He gently reached out and dabbed a drop of wine from Sarah's cheek. "I leave you alone for 1 hour," Elias said, his voice soft, intimate, and audible to the entire silent room. "And you're already making a mess of the merchandise." Sarah rolled her eyes, though her hands were shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "He threw the Latour at me, Eli." Elias paused. The tenderness vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, robotic mask. He slowly turned to face Preston. Preston Calloway was trembling. He looked from Sarah to Elias, the realization crashing down on him like a falling elevator. "Mr. Calloway," Elias said, "I believe you've met my wife." The silence that had fallen over the Vermilion Club was absolute. It was the kind of silence usually reserved for funerals or the seconds immediately following a bomb blast. The only sound was the crackling of the logs in the fireplace, a sound that suddenly seemed deafeningly loud. Preston Calloway stood frozen. His brain was attempting to process the information, but the gears were jamming. Wife? Elias Blackwood's wife? It didn't make sense. Elias Blackwood was the titan of private equity, a man who moved markets with a whisper. His wife shouldn't be wearing a polyester blend uniform and pouring wine for men like Preston. His wife should be on a yacht in the Mediterranean or chairing a charity gala at the Met. I don't understand," Preston stammered. The arrogance that had coated him like armor just seconds ago had evaporated, leaving him looking small, sweaty, and painfully old. He looked at Arthur, his lawyer, for support, but Arthur was staring studiously at his shoes, distancing himself from the blast radius. Elias Blackwood didn't look at Preston. He was still looking at Sarah, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw where a speck of wine remained. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. "My pride, mostly," Sarah replied, her voice dry. She reached up and took his hand, squeezing it. "And this shirt is ruined. I actually liked this shirt. It was comfortable. We'll buy the factory that makes them," Elias said, deadpan. Then finally he turned his head. The movement was slow, deliberate, and terrifying. When Elias locked eyes with Preston, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Elias wasn't yelling. He wasn't red in the face. He was perfectly, surgically calm. "Mr. Calloway," Elias said, "you seem confused." "Elias, please," Preston began, his voice pitching up an octave. He held out his hands in a placating gesture. "It was a misunderstanding, a joke. You know how it is. We were just having a bit of fun with the staff. If I had known she was associated with you—" "Associated?" Elias repeated the word, as if it tasted foul. "She isn't associated with me, Preston. She isn't a business acquisition. She is the mother of my children. She is the reason I wake up in the morning. And she is the only person on this planet who can tell me not to destroy you right here, right now, with my bare hands." Preston swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing violently. "I apologize. Sincerely. Sarah, Mrs. Blackwood, I am deeply sorry for my behavior. The wine, I'll pay for it. I'll make a donation to a charity of your choice, $1 million. Right now." Sarah stepped out from behind Elias. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. Despite the stained clothes, she stood with the posture of a queen. She looked at Preston with a mixture of pity and contempt. "You think this is about money, Preston?" Sarah asked. "That's your problem. You think everything is about money. You think you can buy manners. You think you can buy dignity." She walked over to the table where Preston had been sitting. The three other men, the lawyers and fixers, scrambled to stand up, terrified of being lumped in with their boss. "We were just leaving, Mrs. Blackwood," Arthur squeaked, grabbing his briefcase. "We had no part in this. We told him to stop." "Sit down," Sarah commanded. The three men sat instantly. Sarah picked up the bottle of Chateau Latour. It was still half full. She looked at the label, then at Preston. "Do you know why I work here, Preston?" she asked. Preston shook his head, mute. "My grandfather started the Miller Hotel Group 70 years ago," Sarah said, pacing slowly around the table. "He started as a bellhop. He taught me that you can't lead a company if you don't understand the people who keep it running. You, Preston, you see a balance sheet. I see the people. I've been working undercover at all my properties for the last 6 months to see which managers are competent and which ones are toxic." She stopped in front of him. "And do you know what I found out tonight? I found out that the Vermilion Club, which my family's trust owns, has a pest problem." Preston's eyes widened. You own the club?" "The building, the land, and the brand," Sarah confirmed. "And as the owner, I reserve the right to revoke membership for conduct unbecoming of a gentleman." She turned to Claude, the maitre d', who was watching with wide, awestruck eyes. "Claude," Sarah said. "Yes, madame." Claude stood at attention. "Mr. Calloway's membership is terminated, effective immediately. He is barred from this location and all Miller properties globally. That includes the hotels in London, Tokyo, and Paris." "Understood, madam," Claude said, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "You can't do that," Preston spluttered, panic setting in. "I have business meetings scheduled here for months. My reputation. Your reputation is currently dripping down my vest," Sarah cut him off. Elias stepped forward, closing the distance between him and Preston. He loomed over the smaller man. "You should leave, Preston," Elias said softly, "before I forget that my wife asked me to be civil." Preston looked around the room. Every eye was on him. The other diners, senators, celebrities, tycoons, were watching his destruction with grim fascination. He realized with a sinking heart that this story would be all over New York by breakfast. He wasn't just losing a club membership, he was losing his standing in the tribe. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. He didn't look at his lawyers. He didn't look at Sarah. He turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps hurried and uneven. "Oh, and Preston," Sarah called out, just before he reached the exit. He stopped, his hand on the brass handle. He didn't turn around. "That merger meeting tomorrow morning," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent restaurant. "Don't be late. I'm the chairwoman of the board now, and we have a lot to discuss." Preston Calloway pushed the door open and fled into the rainy night, the laughter of the dining room chasing him out onto the street. The morning sun hit the glass skyline of Manhattan with a brilliance that felt mocking to Preston Calloway. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night in his penthouse, pacing the floor, drinking whiskey that tasted like ash, and screaming at his PR team over the phone. The damage control was failing. Someone had filmed the incident. Of course they had. In the age of smartphones, privacy was a myth, even in exclusive clubs. The video of him throwing wine on Sarah, labeled "Billionaire Bully's Secret Heiress," had 5 million views on Twitter by 6:04 a.m. The comments were a bloodbath. "Boycott Calloway Voss. Eat the rich. Who is this guy? Let's short his stock. And they were. Callaway Voss stock was down 12% in pre-market trading. Preston stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin grey. He splashed cold water on his face. "Pull it together," he hissed at himself. "You are Preston Callaway. You built an empire. She's just a girl playing dress-up. You can still win this." He convinced himself that business was business. The Miller Trust needed the money. Sarah might hate him personally, but the board had a fiduciary duty to shareholders. If he offered enough money, they had to accept the buyout. Emotions didn't belong in the boardroom. He dressed in his power suit, a charcoal Tom Ford three-piece, and practiced his pitch in the mirror. He would be humble but firm. He would apologize for the unfortunate incident, but pivot immediately to the numbers. The numbers were on his side. At 8:30 a.m., his limousine pulled up to the Miller Trust headquarters in Midtown. It was an older building, Art Deco style, radiating quiet, established wealth. It wasn't flashy like Preston's glass tower, but it was solid, indestructible. Preston walked into the lobby, his team of lawyers trailing behind him like frightened ducklings. Arthur, the lawyer from the night before, had called in sick. Coward. The receptionist didn't smile when he gave his name. She simply pressed a button and said, "They are waiting for you in the boardroom, Mr. Callaway. Top floor." The elevator ride was silent. Preston checked his watch. 8:55 a.m. When the elevator doors opened, he wasn't greeted by an assistant. He was greeted by a long hallway, lined with portraits of the Miller family ancestors, stern men and women who looked like they built railroads with their bare hands. At the end of the hall, the double oak doors to the boardroom stood closed. Preston took a deep breath, adjusted his tie, and pushed them open. He expected a full board of 12 people. He expected arguments. He expected noise. Instead, the massive oval table was empty. Well, almost empty. At the far end, sitting alone at the head of the table, was Sarah. She looked nothing like the waitress from the night before. Her hair was down, cascading over her shoulders in golden waves. She wore a cream-colored power suit that looked like it cost more than Preston's car. On her wrist sat a Patek Philippe watch. She was reading a file, a pair of reading glasses perched on her nose. Standing behind her, looking out the window at the city below, was Elias Blackwood. He wore a dark navy suit, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn around when Preston entered. "You're early," Sarah said, not looking up from the file. "Mrs. Blackwood," Preston said, trying to project confidence as he walked to the other end of the table. He set his briefcase down. "I assume the rest of the board is joining us?" "No," Sarah said, finally looking up. Her eyes were ice blue, sharp and unyielding. "I dismissed them. I told them I would handle this negotiation personally. I own 51% of the voting shares, Preston. I am the board." Preston swallowed. This was bad. A hostile audience of one. "Very well," Preston said, taking a seat. He didn't wait to be asked. "Sarah, look, about last night. I was under a lot of stress. The merger, the market volatility, it's no excuse, but I hope you can separate the personal from the professional. My offer for the Miller Hotel Group is 40% above market value. It's a win for your family." Sarah closed the file. The sound echoed in the large room. "You want to buy my hotels for the land," she said. "You want to bulldoze 3 historic landmarks to build server farms for your data centers. You want to fire 4,000 employees, people like Claude, people like the chefs, the maids, the valets. You want to automate everything." "It's progress, Sarah," Preston argued. "It's efficiency, and with that money you could do anything. You could endow charities, you could— I don't need your money, Preston, Sarah interrupted softly. And neither does Elias. Elias turned around from the window. We checked your financials this morning. Preston, you're overextended. Preston stiffened. That's proprietary information. It's amazing what you can find when you look hard enough, Elias said, walking slowly toward the table. You leveraged your own company stock to finance this takeover bid. You're betting the farm. If this deal doesn't go through, your stock price collapses. You get margin called. You lose everything. Preston felt a cold sweat break out on his back. They knew. The deal is good, Preston insisted, his voice rising. It's good for both of us. If you say no just out of spite, you're breaching your duty to maximize profit. Sarah laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Spite? She asked. Preston, you assaulted a member of my staff. You humiliated a woman because you thought she was powerless. That's not spite on my part. That's character assessment. And my assessment is that you are unfit to do business with. She slid the file across the long table. It spun and stopped perfectly in front of him. What is this? Preston asked. A counteroffer, Sarah said. Preston opened the file. He scanned the first page. His eyes widened. He flipped the page, reading faster. His hands began to shake. This is a joke, he whispered. No, Sarah said. You want to buy me? Preston gasped. Not you, Elias corrected. We have no use for you. We want Callaway Voss Industries. For 10 cents on the dollar. Preston slammed his hand on the table. This is an insult. My company is worth billions. Your company was worth billions yesterday, Sarah said calmly. But this morning, after the video of you went viral, your stock dropped 15%. And in about 5 minutes, when I announce publicly that the Miller Trust is not only rejecting your merger, but suing you for assault and emotional distress, your stock is going to freefall. She leaned forward. The banks will call your loans by lunch, Preston. You'll be bankrupt by dinner. Unless you sign that paper. Preston stared at the document. It was a total surrender. They were offering to buy his debt and take control of his company, leaving him with a golden parachute that was more like a tin umbrella. He would be out. Fired from his own company. You planned this, Preston whispered. You set me up. I didn't make you throw the wine, Preston, Sarah said. I didn't make you a bully. I just gave you enough rope. You did the hanging all by yourself. Preston looked at Elias. The Reaper was watching him with zero sympathy. I won't sign, Preston snarled. I'll fight you. I have lawyers. I have friends in the Senate. Check your phone, Preston, Elias said. Preston frowned. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. There were 20 missed calls, 10 from his board of directors, 5 from his biggest investors, and 1 text message from his friend in the Senate. The text read, Preston saw the video. Disgusting. Don't contact me until this blows over, or ever. The board is calling an emergency meeting, Sarah said, checking her own watch. They want to oust you as CEO to save the stock price. If they fire you for cause, which given the PR disaster, they will, you get nothing. No severance, no stock options. Nothing. She pointed to the paper. If you sign this, you walk away with $5 million and a non-disclosure agreement. You disappear. You retire to Florida and play golf. It's more than you deserve. But I'm feeling generous. Preston looked at the paper. Then at the window. He felt like the walls were closing in. The empire he had spent 30 years building was crumbling because of a single drop of wine. Preston's voice broke. I am Preston Callaway. Not anymore, Sarah said. Now, you're just the man who spilled the wine. She took a pen from her pocket, a cheap, plastic Bic pen, the kind a waitress would use to take an order, and slid it across the table. "Sign it, Preston, before I change my mind and decide to ruin you simply for the sport of it." Preston Calloway, the king of Fifth Avenue, looked at the plastic pen. His hand trembled as he reached for it. He realized with a crushing finality that he had never really been the powerful one in the room. He had just been the loudest. He uncapped the pen. The sound was a sharp click in the silent room. He signed. The takeover of Calloway Voss Industries was swift, brutal, and completely silent. By noon the following day, the signage in the lobby hadn't changed, but the atmosphere had shifted from arrogant bustle to terrified stillness. Sarah walked through the glass doors of the headquarters on Wall Street, flanked not by lawyers, but by Elias and her own team of transition specialists. She wasn't wearing the waitress uniform anymore, nor the power suit from the boardroom. She wore a simple, elegant black dress and a blazer. She looked approachable, yet undeniably in charge. The employees, programmers, analysts, junior executives watched her from their cubicles with wide, fearful eyes. They had heard the stories. They knew Preston Calloway had been ousted. In the corporate world, when a new owner takes over, it usually means one thing: restructuring, a polite word for mass firings. "They look like they're waiting for an execution," Elias murmured, walking beside her. "They're terrified," Sarah replied quietly. "Preston ran this place on fear. They think I'm going to be worse because I have a vendetta." They reached the elevator. Sarah pressed the button for the main auditorium, not the executive suite. "I need to address them, Eli. All of them. Now." While Sarah prepared to speak to the 3,000 employees of the company she had just bought, Preston Calloway was on the top floor, clearing out his office. Technically, he had 24 hours to vacate. He was tossing items into a cardboard box with violent, jerky movements. A framed photo of himself with the president. Trash. His Executive of the Year trophy. He threw it against the wall, shattering the glass casing. He was a broken man. The news cycle had moved on from Billionaire bullies Waitress to the fall of Calloway. The humiliation was total. He had $5 million to his name, a fortune to most, but destitution to him. He was exiled from the tribe of the elite. "Stupid," Preston muttered, swiping a stack of files off his mahogany desk. "Stupid, stupid girl." As the files cascaded onto the floor, spilling papers everywhere, one particular manila folder caught his eye. It had slid out from the bottom of a drawer he hadn't opened in years. It was marked, "Background check, S. Miller, E. Blackwood." Preston paused. He remembered this. 5 years ago, when Elias Blackwood had married that nobody, Sarah, Preston had hired a private investigator to dig up dirt. He wanted leverage on Elias. At the time, the PI had called him and said, "It's complicated, Mr. Calloway. She has a record, but it's sealed." Preston had been too busy acquiring a telecom startup in Brazil to care. He had tossed the file in the drawer and forgotten about it. After all, Elias was too powerful to blackmail back then. But now? Now Preston had nothing to lose. He knelt on the expensive Persian rug, his hands shaking as he picked up the folder. He opened it. Inside was a mugshot. It was Sora. She looked barely 18, her face gaunt, her eyes hollow and dark, hair matted. She looked like a different species from the glowing, confident woman who had just taken his company. Preston scanned the document attached. Charge: grand larceny, breaking and entering, possession of controlled substances, found on premises. Date: 15 years ago. Location: the Bronx. Preston's eyes widened. A slow, wicked grin spread across his face, chasing away the despair. "Grand larceny," he whispered. The heiress is a thief." He flipped to the next page. It was a police report detailing the incident. Apparently, Sarah Miller hadn't just been a rich girl acting out. She had been found living in a condemned building with a group of squatters. She had been arrested for stealing jewelry from a pawn shop. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a nuclear bomb. The Miller Trust prided itself on integrity. Their brand was old money, good values. If the world knew that the chairwoman of the board was a convicted felon who used to rob pawn shops, the stock price would plummet. The board would be forced to remove her to save face. And if Sarah was removed, the deal she forced Preston to sign could be voided on the grounds of bad faith or moral turpitude. Preston laughed. It was a jagged, manic sound. "You didn't win, Sarah," he hissed, clutching the file to his chest like a lifeline. "You just handed me the gun." He stood up, adjusted his tie, and smoothed back his silver hair. He didn't need the cardboard box anymore. He checked his watch. The internal monitor on his desk showed a live feed of the auditorium downstairs. Sarah was just walking onto the stage to address the company. "Perfect," Preston said. "Let's introduce the real Sarah to her new employees." The auditorium Callaway Voss Industries was packed. 3,000 people stood in silence as Sarah took the podium. The microphone feedback whined for a split second before settling. "Good morning," Sarah began. Her voice was steady, projecting a warmth that confused the terrified staff. "I know you are all worried. I know you've heard rumors that I bought this company to dismantle it. That I'm here to fire you." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "I want to be clear. No one is getting fired today. No one is getting fired tomorrow. Preston Callaway viewed you as overhead. I view you as the engine. The only thing changing today is the culture. We are going to treat people with dignity." A ripple of relief went through the room. Shoulders relaxed. A few tentative smiles appeared. "This company has immense potential," Sarah continued, "but it lost its way because it forgot that success isn't just about the stock price. It's about bang! The double doors at the back of the auditorium slammed open. The heads of 3,000 employees turned in unison. Preston Callaway stood there. He looked disheveled, his eyes wild, holding a manila folder high in the air like a prophet holding a tablet. "Don't listen to her," Preston shouted, his voice echoing off the acoustic panels. He began marching down the center aisle. Security guards hesitated. This was their boss until 2 hours ago. They looked at Sarah for instruction. Sarah stood frozen at the podium. She saw the folder. She saw the look in Preston's eyes. She knew. Elias, standing in the wings of the stage, started to move forward, his face darkening with rage. He signaled to the security team to intercept. "Let him speak," Sarah said into the microphone. Her voice stopped to the guards. It stopped Elias. Preston reached the base of the stage. He didn't climb up. He turned to face the crowd, his back to Sarah. He held up the mugshot photo, blown up on a piece of paper he had seemingly printed in his office. "You think she's your savior?" Preston screamed, shaking the paper. "You think she's some moral crusader? Look at this. This is your new CEO." He threw the papers into the front row. Confused employees picked them up. The image of the haggard, arrested teenager circulated on the large screens behind the stage. Preston had evidently hacked the feed from his phone. A gasp went through the room. The image was undeniable. It was Sarah. "She's a criminal," Preston bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at her. "Grand larceny. She's a thief. She was a junkie living in a squat in the Bronx. She tricked Elias Blackwood into marrying her, and now she's tricked you. She's not a Miller. She's a fraud." The room began to murmur. The relief from moments ago evaporated, replaced by confusion and shock. The Miller family was American royalty. How could this be true? Preston spun around to face Sarah, triumph blazing in his eyes. "Deny it," he challenged. "Tell them it's fake. Tell them I'm lying." Elias stepped out onto the stage, placing himself between Preston and Sarah. "That's enough, Preston. Security. Remove him." "No," Sarah said. She placed a hand on Elias's arm, gently moving him aside. She stepped up to the edge of the stage, looking down at Preston. She didn't look ashamed. She didn't look angry. She looked sad, but it was a strong kind of sadness. "It's not fake," Sarah said into the microphone. The room went deadly silent. Even Preston blinked, surprised she had admitted it so quickly. "That is me," Sarah said, pointing to the mugshot on the giant screen behind her. "I was 18 years old." She looked up at the employees. "Preston wants you to believe that this photo is proof of my lack of character. He wants you to believe that because I have a record, I am unfit to lead." She took a deep breath. "My mother was a maid," Sarah revealed. "She worked for the Miller family. My father was the son of the patriarch, a man who refused to acknowledge me. When my mother died of cancer when I was 16, the Millers didn't take me in. They didn't even know I existed. I was left with nothing. No money, no home, no family." The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't fearful. It was listening. "I lived on the streets of the Bronx for 2 years," Sarah continued, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength. "I slept in subway stations. I ate out of dumpsters. And yes, I stole. I stole blankets to keep from freezing. I stole sandwiches to keep from starving. And that grand larceny charge? I pawned a watch I found to pay for antibiotics for a friend who was dying of pneumonia in the squat we lived in." Preston's smirk began to fade. He looked around. The crowd wasn't looking at Sarah with disgust. They were looking at her with something else. "I was arrested," Sarah said. "I spent 3 months in Rikers Island waiting for a trial. That was where my grandfather finally found me. He had hired investigators to find his son's illegitimate child. He came to the jail, saw me in an orange jumpsuit, and he cried. He dropped the charges, took me in, and told me that being a Miller wasn't about blood. It was about what you do when you have power." She looked down at Preston, her eyes burning with intensity. "You grew up in a mansion, Preston. You went to Ivy League schools. You were given everything, and yet you use your power to humiliate waitresses and terrorize your employees. I grew up in a gutter. I know what it feels like to be invisible. I know what it feels like to be hungry." She spread her arms, addressing the entire room. "That mugshot isn't my shame, Preston. It is my qualification. It is the reason I know the value of $1, and more importantly, the value of a human being. I will never treat the people in this building like numbers, because I know what it's like to be a statistic. So yes," she finished, her voice ringing like a bell, "I am a thief. I stole my life back from the darkness. And now, I'm taking this company back from you." For 3 seconds, there was silence. Then, a single person in the back of the room started clapping. Then another. Then 100. Then 3,000. The applause wasn't polite. It was thunderous. It was a roar of approval. People were standing up, cheering. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. They weren't cheering for a billionaire heiress. They were cheering for the girl in the mugshot who survived. Preston stood in the middle of the storm, small and insignificant. He looked at the cheering crowd, then at Sarah, who was holding Elias's hand, standing tall on the stage. He realized then that he hadn't exposed her. He had anointed her. 2 large security guards appeared at Preston's elbows. "Mr. Calloway," the head guard said, a man Preston had yelled at for years. "It's time to go. You're trespassing." Preston didn't fight. He let them lead him away, dragging his feet as the applause for Sarah Miller washed over him, drowning him out completely. 3 weeks later, the atmosphere inside the Vermilion Club had undergone a subtle but profound transformation. The mahogany was still dark, the crystal still sparkled, and the fire still crackled in the hearth. But the air felt lighter. The suffocating tension that used to accompany the arrival of high-profile guests had evaporated. Outside, the first snow of December was dusting Fifth Avenue, turning New York City into a monochrome painting. Inside, at the very same table where Preston Calloway had once held court, Sarah and Elias sat. This time, Sarah wasn't wearing a uniform. She wore a soft cashmere sweater, and her hand rested comfortably in Elias's. They weren't surrounded by lawyers or sycophants. They were just a husband and wife, enjoying a rare, quiet evening, away from the storm of media attention that had followed the mug-shot speech. Claude, the maitre d', approached the table. He looked 10 years younger. The perpetual sweat of anxiety that used to bead on his forehead was gone. "The chef has prepared a special risotto for you, madame," Claude said, beaming. "And he insists on knowing if the temperature of the wine is to your liking." Sarah smiled, swirling her glass, a modest Pinot Noir, not the $4,000 Latour. "Tell him it's perfect, Claude, and please, tell him to stop sending out free appetizers. We're paying customers tonight." "For you, Sarah, the kitchen would cook for free forever," Claude replied with genuine affection. "You saved their jobs. They haven't forgotten." As Claude walked away, Elias squeezed Sarah's hand. "You know, the stock is up 20% since your speech. Wall Street likes a redemption arc." "They like stability," Sarah corrected, though her eyes twinkled. "And they like that I didn't fire the engineering team. Who knew treating people like human beings was a viable business strategy?" "I did," Elias said softly. "That's why I married you." Just then, the sound of crashing china shattered the mood. It came from the station near the kitchen doors. A young waitress, clearly new and visibly terrified, had tripped. A tray loaded with soup bowls had gone airborne, crashing onto the parquet floor with a cacophony of breaking ceramic and splashing hot liquid. The sound echoed through the dining room. Instinctively, the room went silent. It was a reflex, a phantom pain from the days of Preston Calloway. The diners froze. The staff froze. Every eye turned toward the disaster. The young waitress, a girl no older than 19 named Maya, stood amidst the wreckage. She was shaking violently. Her face was pale, her eyes darting around the room, expecting the inevitable shouting, the humiliation, the firing. She looked ready to bolt for the door. Claude started to move toward her, his face concerned. But Sarah was faster. She didn't stand up and shout. She didn't snap her fingers. She slid out of the booth and walked over to the mess. She didn't walk like a CEO. She walked like someone who knew exactly how slippery a soup spill could be. Maya flinched as Sarah approached. I'm so sorry, Mum. I'm so sorry. I'll clean it. Please don't fire me." Sarah stopped in front of her. She ignored the soup splattered on the hem of her expensive trousers. She crouched down, right there in the middle of the exclusive club, kneeling on the wet floor. "Maya, breathe," Sarah said softly. I tripped," Maya stammered, tears welling up. "This is my first week. I need this job, please." Sarah reached out and picked up a shard of broken ceramic. "I know," she said. "I dropped a bottle of Chateau Latour 3 weeks ago. It cost more than a Honda Civic. This is just soup." Maya blinked, looking down at the woman kneeling beside her. You did?" "I did," Sarah smiled. "And the man who yelled at me for it isn't allowed in here anymore. But you are." Sarah grabbed a stack of napkins from a nearby table and started blotting the liquid. "Grab the dustpan, Maya," Sarah instructed calmly, as if they were co-workers on a shift. "I'll get the big pieces. You get the broom. We'll have this cleared in 2 minutes." The room watched in stunned silence. The chairwoman of the board of Callaway Voss Industries, a woman worth billions, was on her hands and knees, helping a clumsy teenager clean up vegetable soup. Elias watched from the table, a look of fierce pride on his face. He didn't move to stop her. He knew better. A man at a nearby table, a hedge fund manager who used to laugh at Preston's jokes, slowly stood up. He grabbed his own napkin. "Here," the man said, walking over and crouching down to help. "Let me get that side." Then another person stood up. And another. Within seconds, the silence of fear was replaced by the low murmur of cooperation. The tension broke. The royal table mentality that Preston had built was dismantled, not by a hostile takeover, but by a simple act of kindness. When the mess was cleared, Sarah stood up and wiped her hands. She turned to Maya. "Go get a fresh uniform," Sarah said gently, "and take 5 minutes in the break room to collect yourself. You're doing fine." "Thank you," Maya whispered, looking at Sarah as if she were a superhero. "Thank you so much." As Maya hurried away, Sarah returned to her table. The room didn't applaud this time. There was no need for fanfare. The diners simply nodded at her, a gesture of genuine respect, and returned to their meals. Elias poured more wine into Sarah's glass as she sat down. "You missed a spot on your trousers," he noted. "It'll wash out," Sarah shrugged. She looked around the room, at the warm light, the smiling staff, the guests who were actually enjoying their evening rather than performing it. "You know," Sarah said, looking at the empty space where Preston used to sit, "he was right about one thing." "What's that?" "The silence," Sarah said. "When he was here, the room went silent because everyone was afraid. Tonight, it went silent because everyone was helping." She raised her glass. "To the right kind of silence." Elias clinked his glass against hers. "To the Queen of Fifth Avenue." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the footprints of the past, leaving everything clean, white, and ready for a new beginning. And that is the story of how a single drop of spilled wine brought down a billionaire and revealed the true character of a leader. It reminds us that true power isn't about how loud you can yell or how much money you have in the bank. True power is about how you treat people when you think no one is watching, and how you lift them up when they fall. Preston Callaway thought he was untouchable because of his wealth, but he forgot that dignity is the one currency you can never buy. You have to earn it. Sarah Miller proved that your past doesn't define you. Your actions do. What would you have done if you were in Sarah's shoes? Have you ever had a boss like Preston? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that nice guys and gals can finish first. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.